Don't you renounce everything if you're an ascetic? So Shiva encompasses all these very strange combinations of characteristics, and that is what makes him so fascinating. But when I'm looking at him historically, historicizing Shiva, I need to go first to the earliest depiction of Shiva, which is in the Indus Valley civilization. Now, why I didn't bring it up earlier is because there's so much of controversy about it. I mean, there's such a tiny little seal, and there are about 3 of them, in which there's this personage depicted in what appears to be a Shiva mode. It looks like Shiva, but we're not sure who he is because the inscriptions that are there have not been deciphered satisfactorily. Historians have not come to a conclusion regarding those inscriptions. So we don't know who this person is, but he looks very Shiva-like. Let me tell you what he's doing in that tiny little seal. There's this personage sitting in what appears to be a yogic asana. And as we know, Shiva is the first deity to be associated with yoga. In fact, the only deity associated with yoga. We hear, and I'm going to digress a little here, but the earliest texts that speak about yoga are the Yoga Sutras by Patanjali. Now that would be dated around circa 2nd century BC. But the idea of yoga goes way beyond that. We already hear of yogic ideas, yogic thought, even in the Vedas. And as for seeing depictions of yoga, we can see that already in the Indus Valley civilization. And the Indus Valley civilization goes back to circa 3000 BC. So there are these tiny seals in which the personage is seated in a yogic asana. And the one I'm talking about is called seal number 420. And in that seal, he's seated in a very difficult yogic asana. It's called the Badkon asana. So he has both his feet together like this and his hands on his knees exactly like this with the palms out in this yogic manner. And he's seated there and he has something that looks like a headdress on top of his head. And he appears to be ithyphallic, which means he's nude, he appears to have an erect member, and Shiva is associated with phallicism, that is the erect member. Now it's difficult to say, is that really an erect member? Because what some other historians have said, oh, it's not even a male, it's a female. And that's a belt that you see which you think is an erect member. But if it is an erect member, then it has to be associated with Shiva, because Shiva is the ithyphallic god, the god who has an erect member. And later on, much later, when we come to the Gupta period, which is circa 4th century, we no longer see images of him nude with an erect member, but we see the phallus, that is the ling, worshipped separately, and Shiva seated separately, Shiva worshipped separately. So these kind of developments, it's hauntingly mysterious. How can you worship a god by his ling? How can you worship a god by his phallus? What is it in this Shiva that makes people worship the ling in the way they worship the ling? So when we go back to Indus Valley civilization, we even find little tiny little lings all over the place. So some historians have said that shows that maybe there were people who kept the ling on their body, just like the present day Lingayats do in Karnataka. Maybe they wore it on as an amulet around their neck or something like that. What are these little lings which look very much like the male sex organ? What are they? So there are all these questions that come up, when I'm teaching Indus Valley civilization. Students are astounded by this, that was Shiva really there in 3000 BC? And if he was there, we don't see any evidence of Vishnu, we don't see any evidence of Krishna or Ram or any of the other gods, but we do see some evidence of Shiva. Because if that divinity that we see is truly a divine, if he is truly ithyphallic, if he is seated in the yogic posture, it has to be Shiva. I mean, who else does that? Is anybody else ithyphallic? Is anybody else in a yogic posture, any of the other gods? No, it's always Shiva. You'll see him, wherever you'll see the ancient sculptures, he's either sitting in the Ardhaparyana pose, or he's sitting in Lalitasana, or he's sitting in Padmasana. It's always an asana. It's always an asana. Shiva is associated with yoga. And in any case, being the Mahayogi, that's what he used to do when he was an ascetic. He would be practicing yoga. So this whole idea of yoga is associated with Shiva. And yoga is basically the main brand of India. India is associated with yoga. India is the hotbed. India is the place from where yoga emerged. Shiva is the god from where it emerged. At least I truly believe that. There are other controversies, and people say maybe yoga came from wrestling and maybe much later on. Whatever evidence I can see in ancient Indian history, I do believe that yoga started in India, and Shiva was the god who was associated with it. How many hats does he wear? How many things is he associated with? I mean, when you look at dance, he's the one. Anywhere you go to any school concert, you go to a college concert, you go to a concert by a famous dancer on a beautiful stage, you'll always see, ubiquitous would be the image of Nataraj, that is Shiva with the flame of fire around him in the dancing pose. He'll always be there. It doesn't matter if the dancer is a Muslim or a Hindu or a Christian, doesn't matter. Shiva is the deity who will be worshipped before any dance recital. So he is associated with dance also in that manner. At the same time, whenever anybody is fearful, when fear comes into their life and they want to become strong, they will worship him as his Bhairav Murti, because Bhairav is the Ugra form, the angry, the fearsome form. So if you worship him in his fearsome form, all your fears will dissipate, all your fears will go away. At the same time, every Monday, you find millions of girls all over North India, and I'm sure South India, will worship Shiva. Every Monday they will fast. And why will they fast? Amusingly enough, because they want to have a husband like Shiva. This was crazy. When I was doing my PhD, one of the very well-known Indologists from Bengal, he asked me, he said, look at Shiva. I mean, look at the way he's dressed and look at the way he behaves, and snakes slithering up and down his chest. Why do all these young girls want to have a husband like Shiva? And he actually asked that to me in a very important academic, viva of mine for my PhD. And all I could reply to him, I said, sir, don't you see how colorful Shiva is? What a colorful man he is. I mean, wouldn't any girl would like to marry a personality as colorful as Shiva? So every Monday, girls will do Sola Somvar. They'll do their 16 fast every single Monday. They want a husband like Shiva. That is the beauty of Shiva. That is the essence of Shiva, to understand Shiva in all his paradoxes. But this beauty of Shiva reflects then on human nature, because human nature is paradoxical. None of us follow a straight and narrow path. All of us are different types of people. All of us have quirks within us. All of us have different psychological inputs in us. All of us have different kinds of behavior. And Shiva has all of them. He's the angry one, he's the beneficent one, he's the auspicious one, he's the propitious one. Everything you can see within Shiva. So I don't find it surprising then that people should love him or revere him, or if not anything, don't love him, don't revere him, but you cannot stay unmoved by Shiva. You will be moved by Shiva. Whether you get irritated, whether you find it disgusting, whether you find it lovely, beautiful, whether you find it useful for your life, you will be moved by Shiva. Because nothing Shiva would do in all the myths that we read about him, nothing he would do can keep the world unmoved. If he's dancing, the whole world is shaking. If he's making love to Parvati, the whole world is shaking. If he's angry, the whole world is shaking. If he's in bereavement, the whole world is shaking. So the whole world gets influenced by him, and the myths are so powerfully telling us about the power he has in his grief, in his anger, in his sadness, in his happiness, in his indifference, and in his detachment, in everything. So Shiva is needed. Shiva there with his third eye, Shiva there with his Jatamukuta. I mean, his Jatamukuta. What lovely names are given. One epithet is Kapardin. It's beautiful. It means he who has a head which resembles the back of a snake, because there are all these coils on the back of his head, all, with the coiled mats. And this hair, why does he have hair like this? This itself, the hair, hair has a tremendous amount of influence in society. How do you wear your hair? Are you cutting your hair? Are you bald? Or like Sikhs don't cut their hair at all. Are you bald? Are you a widow in India? Many widows have to completely become bald. Hair has a significance and symbolism in society. So the way Shiva wears his hair has a great amount of significance. He just leaves it. He doesn't do anything about it. It shows like he doesn't care. He has this self-autonomy. It's kind of like, I don't care. It's matted. I'm bothered more about my meditation. I'm bothered more about my self-introspection. I'm not going to comb my hair. I'm not going to do anything about it. And he just leaves it like that. But of course, when you want to get those kind of dreaded locks, there's a manner that all these monks who do that, who follow him, the ascetics who follow him, they have to, put Ganga water, Ganga mud, cow urine, a whole lot of things go into making those matted locks. It's not easy, but there's Shiva. Again, just by his hair, you can see how he is so much dependent on his own needs and what he thinks is right. He doesn't go according to society. And here is a God who doesn't go according to society. That is also very surprising, that people who can see that he's such an outsider, he's such a rebel in a way, and yet he is a family man, yet he has wonderful children like Ganesha and Skanda Kartikeya, he has a wife like Parvati. So these paradoxes that come in, I felt the need to explain them in the best way that I have understood them. In the best way. For the last 30 years, I have been reading about Shiva. I've been picking up books by scholars, picking up books by just people who have renounced the world, picking up books by foreign scholars who have understood Shiva in a certain way. I've been traveling around looking at sculpture of Shiva, both old and new, and then I've sat and talked to worshippers and devout believers of Shiva. And one thing I've noticed, the thing that comes up most when I speak to those people, again, which I have already said, is this autonomy, this feeling that whatever you will choose to do will be right, will be the correct one. This kind of conviction about your own belief, this is something which is very Shaivite in my opinion. And it's that I want to explicate, and I want to talk about, and I want to, bring out the essence of the kind of teachings I've got from these myths, because it's basically from the mythology that you can understand Shiva. It's when you study the mythology, you look for deeper meanings, you will be able to understand Shiva. Not in one reading, but maybe 2, maybe 3. In fact, each time I pick up a Puran, the old scriptures, each time I pick up a Veda, each time I pick up an Upanishad, I get a new meaning into Shiva, and it is extremely fascinating. In our country, we believe in the Bhakti movement, and everyone thinks that the Bhakti movement started with Bhagavad Gita and it was for Krishna. But even before that, like almost 400 years before that, there's a text for Shiva in which Shiva is being given so much of importance. It's called the Shvetasaptara Upanishad. And there we clearly hear that they're saying, Ekahi Deva Rudra Maharshi. There is only one Deva, and that is Rudra. That is Rudra Shiva. He was called Rudra earlier, later on it became hyphenated Rudra Shiva. And now most people just call him Shiva. So you find that there's already the beginning of bhakti as early as circa 700 BC in the Shvetasaptara Upanishad, and the bhakti is for Shiva, that he is the only God, he is the greatest God. Now, there's no need to do that, because if you look at the Rig Veda, there are lovely sayings that there's the manyness of God. There's so many gods, but there's one truth, but there are many manifestations, many forms of gods that we see. And we see that in the 330 million gods and goddesses that are supposed to be part of India. But Shiva has been able to survive, and after all those 330 million gods and goddesses, as one of the main deities of India, along with Vishnu, along with Krishna, along with Ram. But Shiva, as the main God, he is supposed to be part of the Trinity, he's supposed to be part of Trimurti, but at the same time he holds the key, because he has the key to all the cultural markings of Indian subcontinent. Having said the fact that Rudra in the Rig Veda was associated with archery and how he used to harm the cattle, at the same time, he's the one who has knowledge of herbs. He's the one who can cure all kinds of diseases. So they say, they beseech him, they pray him. There are these long hymns in which he is beseeched that please cure us of all ailments by your herbs. Much later on, in inscriptions and in text, we hear of Shiva's very well-known epithet, Vaidyanathan. That is